Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. We are very excited to have you here to learn with Truce Family about what educators should know about child gambling. We are going to get started right away. We have lots to talk about, and I don't want anyone to miss out on any of the good stuff that we have to learn about. So again, thank you for joining us today for Truce Family's webinar, What Educators Should Know About Child Gambling. My name is Alejandra Acosta. I am the Director of Community Engagement at Truce Family, and I'm so excited for you to be here with us today. At Truce Family, we believe that leveraging technology can empower schools and families to help students regain focus and reclaim connection. We know that learning outcomes and students' well-being is very important to all of us here, and that's exactly why we wanted to talk about one of the challenges that students are facing when their phones are virtually unrestricted to them, and what schools can do to help them. With that, I'd like to introduce our speaker, Kim Freudenberg. Kim is a wonderful person that I got to meet at the Common Sense Media Summit. She is the president of Parents Standing Together. She is an advocate for children and young adults who are experiencing or are at risk of gambling addictions, and she has a very powerful personal story. I'd love to talk about Kim some more, but Kim is great at telling her story, so I'm just going to pass it over to you, Kim, and let's get started.
Hi, everybody. Good morning. My name is Kim Freudenberg, and I am with Parents Standing Together. And I wanted to talk to you about today what we call the invisible addiction, what educators should know about child and youth gambling. My own son is 23. He's in recovery from a gambling addiction. And I'm also an educator. And this sort of hit me super by surprise. So I wanted to hopefully give you some information so that it doesn't hit you the same way. So Parents Standing Together is my organization. We're a 501c3 nonprofit. Our goal is really education and awareness. We are working to do events like this to help people, teachers, coaches, parents, any adults that work with kids especially, to learn about what is happening in today's gambling landscape and warning signs if it starts to go south for them. We also do resources and peer-led support for parents who have children who are already suffering gambling harm. So we have a support piece and also an education awareness piece at Parents Standing Together. And then, me again, I'm the president of this organization. I also have an IGRS, which is an International Gambling Recovery Specialist peer support certificate, where I've gone and done learning after this has happened to my son so that I can help others. I'm mom of a 23-year-old, which we'll talk about him a little bit more. And as I said, I'm a high school teacher. I teach physics, and we're starting back to the year really soon. So I'm really excited about that. So we don't have this interactive piece in this one, but I do speak to the ninth graders at my school about gambling. So I wanted to kind of show you one of the first things that I asked them, which is interesting if you might ask this to your own students, is I picked 10 things that, are dangerous and asked them to rank how much they've been warned about them by their parents, their teachers, their coaches, their counselors, right? And of course, not surprisingly, almost always the top 5 come out to be, drugs, vaping, smoking, alcohol, marijuana. Everything substance is always at the top. So we're doing a really great job, I think, these days at educating kids about substance use and the potential harms of that. Sex, of course, is there. Seatbelts, helmets comes in last. I always like helmets, but I always tell them, no one used to wear a helmet, but now everyone wears a helmet because it would just be stupid not to, right? So hopefully we can get gambling up the list, right? You see it coming in there at number 9, which usually is where it falls right towards the bottom, because much like my own children in our life, I never had any conversations with them about gambling and why it was potentially something dangerous. It seemed to me in my upbringing to just be something that was fun that we did, right? So we really want gambling to raise up in this list towards the top, right alongside substances and other things we warn kids about. So this was their list. So what we see as the problem today, right? So youth gambling, I think it's starting to be on the radar of people. It was definitely super hidden even a few years ago, but I feel like in even the last 6 months or so, there's really been an uptick in media coverage of problematic gambling and what it's doing to people, and especially what it's doing to our youth, right? The numbers are rising, which we'll talk about. Today's landscape, especially with electronics, right? Most of the kids are gambling on their phones, on their laptops. They're not going to casinos. They're not going to the horse track, right? This isn't really happening anymore for kids. It's all happening electronically, right? Which is why it's really important that we monitor and try to limit what they're exposed to on their electronics. And parents and I would say educators and all adults really are really unprepared for what's happening. I know I was, like I said, people in my support groups that come in, they all kind of come with the same thing. Like I had no idea that this was even happening, or I knew it was happening, but I didn't realize that it could be dangerous, right? So Parents Standing Together as an organization, we exist hopefully to bridge this gap and to get people the information that they need. So real quick, our learning objectives today, we're going to talk about how kids access gambling, the ways that they're doing it, just to kind of put them on your radar. Understanding gambling harm, what it might look like if someone is starting down a path towards a gambling addiction, even if they're not fully there yet. What those signs are, the risk factors, behaviors you might notice as either a parent or an educator, and warning signs that things are starting to go badly, and how to take action early, right? Early intervention, just like with every prevention thing, is super key. We really want to get ahead of it so that we don't have more parents showing up to my support group with young adults that are in complete collapse, right? We're like to try to, stave it off before it gets there. Okay, so this is my son, Kurt. This is his story. So I'm going to weave a little bit of his story into there. So this is him as a kid. We used to go to a lot of arcades. We used to love going spin the wheel, do, Dave and Buster's type stuff, all of this, constantly get the tickets. This was just part of their childhood. We used to play Cards for Money, bingo, lottery scratchers. I mean, you name it, all at fantasy football, March Madness brackets with them when they were really small. And again, not that necessarily those things are bad, but there was no conversation with those of ways that could become potentially harmful, right? Because I didn't know that there were. And then this is a little picture of him that's super cute that I love. And this is his, I think, 11th or 12th birthday, but it was right around this time when he looks back and says, this is the age that I became a gambling addict, okay, at age 11 or 12. So the first part of his story is just through, childhood, gambling with the family, just kind of for fun, but laying those seeds and those pathways for what was to come unknowingly, obviously. I'm not going to do that knowingly to my kid, but I didn't have the education that I needed. When he was about 11 or 12, he was playing video games like most kids are, and we were monitoring it somewhat. Like we knew he was doing it. Didn't exactly know what the games were, totally how they worked, but he started to buy skins, which is like on a video game, it's like an outfit or a gun sheath or something that they can do. And apparently you can take these video game skins to casino sites in other countries, offshore, illegal places, and trade them in for money to bet with, to play roulette, to play blackjack. So he was playing full-on casino gambling games at 11, 12, and 13 using these skins as the currency, right? So it wasn't a lot of money, but it was a lot of time for him. And he would do these little surveys and trivias on these, YouTube sites to get $1 that he would then take to these casinos. So pretty quickly, it became a big part of his life. And he had a pretty big win. I think he said he won like $2,000 when he was like 12. And you'd think, oh, great, he's going to buy something. No, because he was already on that path and he was put it right back in. And that was sort of, he said, the worst thing that happened to him because it fueled this addiction, right? So as he moved on through middle and high school, he did this, but he was still, didn't even show some of the warning signs that I'll talk about. Some he did, but like he still had good grades. He was playing sports. It was COVID in his senior year. So I think that really accelerated it because you know how that was. But by the time he got to college, he really started betting on sports and, crypto casinos and a bunch of other stuff that I'll talk about. But that was his young days. So just people like to say, well, kids aren't gambling. Kids are absolutely gambling, right? So, and I'm hoping after this, you'll see the ways that it's happening just to be aware of it. Okay. Okay, so this is a little word cloud that I also did with the ninth graders, is one of many that I've done. And I just asked them, what is gambling, right? And so you may have some similar answers if you think about it. You're probably going to go to, casinos, slot machines, poker. People of my advanced age might say, horse racing, dog racing, whatever. But sports betting definitely is now in the picture more than it was a couple years ago, which we'll talk about. But then if you look at this, it's interesting because some of the kids you can see, the words aren't as big, but they're talking about, regular things you do, Plinko, lottery, things that we think of as being things that kids do for fun. You can see the one kid put my sad life, which is kind of alarming, right? Because that's probably a kid that's already struggling. Gotcha games we'll talk about. And then of course, if you teach high school, some of the random things that comes up. But they're kind of still hitting those main things. Some of them, look how big Roblox is. That's pretty big. So that means a lot of kids already know that they are gambling on Roblox. They know it's gambling, right? So definitely we want to expand our definition of what gambling is beyond, especially as more, grown adults, what we think of it as. So gambling, what I want you to do is think about all the activities that you may do. And I'm talking about things you do in class, things you might do at school, things you do at home with your own kids, right? Things that you might not consider gambling, but that are, okay? So gambling by law means you're risking something of value, okay? Usually money, but it doesn't have to be, based on a chance outcome that's out of your control, okay? With the understanding that you are either going to lose that value or win something greater, okay? According to Gamblers Anonymous, which if you don't know is a program where people who have gambling disorder can go for help, just like AA, Alcoholics Anonymous, their definition is a little more broad, which is any betting or wagering for self or others, whether for money or not, okay? No matter how slight or insignificant, where the outcome is uncertain or depends upon chance or skill, constitutes gambling, okay? So my son, being a member of Gamblers Anonymous, he tutors kids in math, right? Like the kid will wad up a paper and say, hey, Kurt, I'll bet you I can get that in the trash can if I throw it. And Kurt will be like, nope, that's a bet. I'm not taking it, right? Now, of course, that's pretty extreme, but that's someone that's had troubles with gambling, okay? But you want to think about anything where there is a chance outcome is possibly priming that brain, okay, for gambling disorder later. Okay, so if we ask the kids if they're gambling, they're probably going to be like, no. Be like, are you betting? They're going to be like, yeah. Okay, so we really want to think about the words. And of course, we know, especially if you teach, the Gen Z types or now the Gen Alpha types, oh my God, like the vocabulary, like don't even get me started, right? But you want to start to listen for certain words that might be gambling, right? So they're probably going to say betting or wagering, of course, right? They might say donating, punting, laying, trading is a new one, staking, it's a lock. They might even call it investing, which we'll talk about, taking action on something, playing, bidding, any of these gambly words, along with gambling language, like over, under, parlay, money line, any of these other gambling words, right? So before this had happened to my family, I probably heard these all the time. But after, now I'll hear kids in class and I'll be like, wait, excuse me, what? Like, tell me that again. What was that? Or they're talking about their fantasy team. Wait, talk to me about what you're doing, because I'm hearing it differently now, right? So I'm hoping that maybe this can get onto your radars too, and then we can build a culture that's going to protect the kids. All right, so some of the numbers are pretty alarming. So first let me preface it with, there's no federal funding for gambling treatment or research. No federal funding at all, zero. Substance gets like, I don't know, 380 billion or some ridiculous number, right? Gambling, zero, all right? So a lot of the data that we work with is very, very old. California, for example, where I'm at and where Truth's family is at, is our last prevalence study was in 2006 to find out how many people were gambling, okay? So think about the landscape of what's happened in the last 20 years, and we're working on data that's 20 years old, all right? There are some smaller, newer studies that pretty consistently show about 60% of college kids are betting on sports. A new Common Sense Media report that came out right before I met Alejandra at the summit said a third of 11 to 17-year-old boys have gambled. A third, okay? So when you're looking at your class, you're looking at those kids, they are gambling, okay? Most of the studies I've seen recently, about 10% of college students are showing signs of problematic gambling. Okay, 10% of college students. And what makes this especially alarming, as the help-seeking rate for people struggling with gambling is usually 10% or under. Okay. It's still a very shame-filled, stigma-filled disease and addiction, and the awareness just isn't there. Okay. And when people do reach out for support, nobody knows what to do with them. Okay. So we have a lot of work to do. And of course, young adults 18 to 29 in our parent support groups, this is the age range, like 18 to 24, where we're seeing a lot of parents come in who have mostly sons, but some daughters as well, in complete collapse already in their young lives before they've even gone out of college. Okay, so ways young kids are gambling. So if you have young kids at home or you teach young kids, all right, there's kind of a spectrum of what they gamble on, all right? So the younger kids ones, you're probably not even thinking of as gambling, but hopefully you can change your mindset to do that. So of course in video games, like I talked about with Kurt, the loot boxes, any kind of mystery box or crate that you spin and it opens and you get a surprise, award, you either get the good thing or the bad thing or the, not so valuable thing, that is gambling. Okay. And kids are doing this from age, 5, right up now. These gotcha games, gotcha mechanics, which is kind of that same loot box mentality, that unknown award or reward. And of course, skins betting that I already talked about. Okay. And this is embedded in like video games everywhere. It's in everything. Okay. Something new that's kind of coming out, not new, but is starting to become more problematic is collectibles. All right. So kids, if your kids are chasing Pokemon cards or sports cards, they're either doing that either electronically or in stores or watching it on YouTube, like these breaks, card breaks where they're watching these happen on YouTube and people are buying them virtually. It's an incredibly explosive thing that's happening and also super dangerous. And then any kind of blind box toy, right? So if you go to Target and you have all the toys and you don't know which character you're going to get when you buy it, right? Like this is gambling. This is teaching 6, 7, 8-year-olds that gambling is okay. All right. So all of those things you want to think of, anything that has that unknown outcome is gambling. All right. And of course, with their family, I know we did it. Not all families do. We were a big gambling family, like I talked about. We played Cards for Money. We did, not sports betting. We didn't use money, but we did March Madness brackets, fantasy football. My kids had their own fantasy football team when they were like 10 in the family league. Okay. And again, not that that's bad, but there was no accompanying discussion about why we're not putting money on it, why it's too risky, why you're going to lose money if you put it on. It's all based on chance. Even if you think who's going to win, you don't know that. Okay, that's always on outcome. Okay, of course, lottery and bingo. I'm always ashamed to say that when I was the PTA president at my kids' elementary school, we had the parent talk, and then I had a bingo night for the kids that I organized. Okay. Looking back, that's probably was really bad. I shouldn't be doing that, right? So any kind of lottery or raffles that you're having at your school, maybe, all of this is gambling, okay? Social casino games, even if there's not money involved, anything that they're doing where there's, kind of like a slot or any kind of an unknown outcome. And then, of course, prize wheels. A lot of us have those maybe in the classroom. Some tutoring centers have them. Where my son works, they have them. Anything with a prize wheel, that's gambling, okay? So just expand your definition and just be aware of what's happening. Okay, next. Okay, so emerging adults, we're thinking more in the technically 18 to 24, but even like 16, this higher high school range, right? Sports betting, as I'm sure you see, is everywhere, all over every advertisement. You can't watch a game without, being inundated with it. The advertising is intense. There are both legal ways to sports bet and illegal sites where you can do it. Kids and most parents don't know the difference between those, right? Like sports betting is technically illegal in California. And I think probably most people don't know that because people are using Prize Picks and prediction markets and offshore sites. But there are many, many ways to do it besides the, big obvious ones that are on TV. Kids are betting with their friends and with bookies. Okay, so you might think bookies is like a thing of the past, but it absolutely is not. And I bet probably every school probably at least has one bookie ring running around in it of somebody that's taking bets and using, their parents' account or whatever. And parents that come into our group definitely have kids that have been in trouble with bookies. Okay. So if you see weird, Venmo things going out to weird people and you don't really know what's happening, we'll talk about that in a minute. That could be bookie signs. Okay. And then of course, fantasy and daily fantasy, season-long fantasy isn't as dangerous, right? Still is gambling. Even if there's not money, I guess still gambling. But what makes it more dangerous is the daily fantasy, when you're constantly picking a new team and a new team. Okay. Financial products are happening. We're going to have a couple more slides on these later. Robinhood, day trading, these trading combines that people join, and of course, prediction markets. We'll talk about that more in a minute. And then all kinds of online and crypto casinos that don't even need money. You can go put it in a crypto ATM and put it in the wallet and this whole thing. And then sweepstakes games that aren't technically gambling, because you buy coins, right, for play for free, and then they gift you cash, which you can gamble with. Okay, so it's totally like a skirt of the law. But sweepstakes are bad, and in certain parts of the country, not where I am, lottery and video terminals, like in gas stations, restaurants, anywhere, these are happening. Okay, and those are, of course, supposed to be regulated, but who's watching the person at the gas station? Okay. Okay, so this is my son again. So this is him in high school. He graduated in COVID. You can see in second COVID graduation, I guess it was, but we still had it outside. He ran track. He was, in AP classes. He was a good student. He had, good grades. But he was gambling by this point in high school, probably 10 hours a day. He was staying up all night to gamble. He was, gambling on like Ukrainian doubles ping pong in the middle of the night on whatever site, and as he tells it now, he was gambling on the bus, on the way to class, on the way to school. He was gambling in class, right? And, he was in classes with people that I know, and I know those people to be good teachers, right? But teachers' eyes aren't everywhere all the time, right? So he was doing it in class, and he was saying, like, I could, put in a quick bet on roulette, and then I could pay attention, and then I could check it. Like, it was fast, right? It's not, super immersive. He said he was doing it in the hallways, right? It could be walking class to class, get out his phone, just place a couple bets on the way. At lunch, of course, right? That's a big time when a bunch of kids are on their phones just doing stuff. And he was literally doing it everywhere all the time, okay? And the kind of terrifying thing is my husband and I had no idea that this was happening. Doing it in our house with our Wi-Fi, with our devices, no clue at all that this was something that was happening to him. So if you haven't read the book, The Anxious Generation by Jonathan Haidt, it's a great, great book. I loved it so much. And the brief synopsis is that today's digital environment is just really super dangerous for kids, okay? For many, many reasons, not just, screen time, not just that, but the full takeover of especially the phone constantly getting your attention, right? The product is, for many of these companies, I just need you to keep swiping, right? Which could be for social media, for whatever, and gambling the same thing, right? That's why these faster betting is just to keep you engaged. And there's always some kind of reward, whether it's money if you gamble, or a like on social media, or a ding because someone sent you a message, right? It's just a very dangerous time to be a kid around electronics. And, my generation it was super new. Like, my kids didn't have a phone until probably late middle school, right? Because it was just kind of coming out. And I think maybe the people now that have much younger kids are starting to see the dangers, but it's kind of this middle ground that we really have to watch for these kids, because we're already kind of ingrained in that system, right? So we really need to find ways to limit how much time they're spending on their phone in lieu of doing other things in life, right? Because really it's not necessarily about the phone, it's about what are they doing instead of, right? Same thing with gambling. All right, so increased gambling risk is what's called the 5 A's is known as, all right? So this is why gambling especially is super dangerous for kids at this point, is the availability is probably the main thing to me, right? 24/7 access through your personal devices, through your phone, online platforms. There is some age verification sometimes, but it's weak and easily bypassed in many cases. I like to say, if my son had to get in a car, drive to a bank, get out money, drive to a casino, show ID at the door, gamble, he for sure wouldn't have been a gambling addict at 13. Okay. And probably not at all, because that's a lot of steps to put together for a young person, right? But it's just pull out the phone, do it. They're doing it in the toilet. They're doing it in the shower. They're doing it on the bus. They're doing it everywhere. Okay. It's just constantly in their pocket. Acceptability is a big problem now too, because gambling now, especially around sports gambling, has been so normalized, and it's such an ingrained part of social circles for young people that It's just part of doing it, especially with sports now. It's part of watching the game is now gambling on the game, right? And the advertisement is persuasive. We have all your favorite sports stars and your favorite actors, and they're giving you, hey, spend $5 and we'll give you $200, which if you read the fine print is not exactly how it works, obviously, right? But to a young brain, they don't know that. They're like, oh great, I can get free money. They don't understand. They don't read the fine print at 16, 17, 18, which is super dangerous. And of course, the age, we all know that, especially if you work with kids, their brains aren't really, I say I love you guys, but your brains aren't quite cooked yet. Like you're not, or not, I guess I shouldn't say cooked, cooking. Your brains aren't quite done yet, right? We're still making connections, and your impulsivity is high. Your judgment of risk is not really super great. And this is just a really dangerous age for them in this, young person up to like 25-ish. And then, of course, access to money. This is another thing that's happening mostly through their phones. Digital payments, right? No one's paying with cash anymore. It's all through Cash App or Venmo or Zelle or their crypto wallet or, whatever other app there is now for money. And that's very hard for parents to keep track of, okay? And it's very hard to trace where the money is going. And then as kids get into college, they have now new access to money, right? People are trying to give them credit cards. They may have student loan money that they use not in the way that it's intended, right? So all of these things for kids is really, it's a super dangerous time to be around gambling. Okay. Next.
All right, thank you, Kim. So we're going to take a brief pause to talk about how Truce Family can be a part of the solution for this challenge. Kim, a lot of what I heard you say is that one of the big roots of the problem is the companies that are doing this. There's not a lot that we can do there right now. It is an uphill battle, but it's also that 24/7 accessibility to these platforms. And that's where schools, believe it or not, can actually have a really big impact on students' lives. And that's what we're here for in Truce Family, is helping students live their best lives by kind of cutting the problem at the root cause in a lot of different ways. And so at Truce Family, I wanted to show you all briefly what we do. We make phone management at school and at home very easy and very effective. So Kim, you mentioned your son was gambling in passing periods, during lunch, in between like activities in class. For us with Truce Family, we will block distracting apps automatically on campus during school hours and just have like an allow list. So emergency calling, for example, or any educational app, those will be open, but everything else that could be tempting to a student is blocked as soon as they walk onto campus, as soon as the bell rings, and then when the bell rings for school to let out. There's nothing for teachers and staff to do. For our students who have IEPs and 504s, maybe they need a little bit more support, like access to a glucose monitoring app or a translation app. We can make those exceptions very easy and very discreet at the individual student level, so that the one student who has the exception isn't walking around with a phone when nobody else can have one. So it kind of minimizes some of that potential bullying or that potential standing out for those students with special needs. And we know that students like to try to get around things very easily, so we do have a dashboard for teachers and admin to maintain visibility into who has the app properly installed and therefore the distractions properly shut off. Students can automatically enroll. We don't need parents to be involved in that, although they can if they choose to, so that we can limit some of these risks once they get home too. And students, if they do remove the app, teachers and staff will get notified right away. And so for Truce Family, we really believe that this is probably the easiest way for teachers and staff to manage student phone use, and one of the really great ways that we can minimize some of the challenges that students face with the risk of gambling, the risk of meeting strangers online. A big reason why this happens is because, as you said, Kim, students have access to their phones all the time. So at least limiting that a little bit at home can help prevent some of these bigger issues that we see. The good thing with Truce too is that we don't just work at school, we work at home too. That's a different conversation. But right now for schools, if you're looking for a way to manage your students' phone use, we'd love to be able to help you out and hopefully also be a part of minimizing the risk that students face in experiencing child gambling addiction. So that's what I wanted to share now. Kim, let's take it back to you. I'd love to hear more about what we can learn and what we can do to prevent child gambling.
As a teacher, I'm gonna say that sounds really good. That was real good. Okay, so back to things on the phone. Okay, so just this is probably not for younger kids as much, but maybe more definitely the high school kids and then into college. Thinking of sending our kids off if we're a high school teacher into college, or even maybe if you are a college educator or someone that works with college kids. The danger of sports betting now is just like we've been talking about, it's not necessarily like the sports betting itself. Like in the old days, right? I'm going to bet on, Niners versus Raiders. Who am I going to take? And I'm going to watch the game and then I'm going to wait and see what happens. Okay. Still betting, but not as dangerous as now, where I can bet on what's the first quarter score? What's the next pass? Is this going to be a run or a play? And I could put a parlay together and I could do all this stuff. And it's so frictionless. Right there on the phone, right there in the apps, constantly doing it. Okay. And again, some platforms are legal, right? But kids are getting on them anyway, usually through maybe their parent might even knowingly be letting them use it, which is a problem, or they're using their parents' information without their knowledge, or any numerous ways to do it illegally online on other platforms, okay? It's super easy to add money. They're very good at taking your money, not as good at giving it back to you when you win. The live betting, right? The constancy as you're watching the game, like here's another one, the micro betting. Future bets is one that I had just learned about recently through someone in our group. You can place a bet now on something that's going to happen, like for this year's Super Bowl, who the winner is going to be. And then it will hold the bet the entire time, which I didn't know you could do. Of course, daily fantasy and regular fantasy, but anything that's that fast pace is where it's becoming more dangerous. Endless betting 24/7, right? We can bet, like I was saying, if you go to our support groups and talk to our parents, almost everyone's kids were betting on some obscure sport in some country across the world, because that's what's available in the middle of the night when they're betting, right? Another reason to turn their phones off at night, which I didn't know. VIP programs and bonus bets, right? They're very aggressive at making sure that they're trying to lure you in by giving you free bets, which are usually, if you read the fine print, incredibly difficult to ever get any money out of those winnings. Okay, it takes a lot of more money in to get it out. Personalized offers, right? So of course, with AI and everything we know now, they know exactly what you want to do, when you do it, when you get paid, when you usually deposit, and all of that stuff, they can feed that to you, right? I like to say, like on Facebook, I watched one of those carpet cleaning videos, where they clean the dirty carpets, and I paused over it once, and now I have all carpet cleaning, right? Which I kind of love them, but but they know your behaviors, right? These companies are very, very smart and employ a lot of people that are trying to capture that attention. Same thing with gambling, okay? And then, of course, all the data and algorithms with them doing it, it's just encouraging excess, more and more and more and more. Okay, it's just not enough. Okay, so this is one of the newer ones coming out that I really want parents and teachers to be aware of, because this is something that might sound on the surface really good. And you might think it's really awesome that your kids are talking about investing and, financial markets and all of this stuff. But this is straight up gambling in many cases. Okay. We're not talking about investing like, we have a retirement account that we've been putting into for 30 years. And now eventually, in like hopefully 5 more years, it's going to finally come to fruition and we're going to retire, right? We're talking about this quick hitting trading. Okay. Which is really just gambling. Okay, so prediction markets like Kalshi, Polymarket, a lot of the big sports books have their own now. There's a bunch of other ones popping up everywhere. Those are 18 plus. Okay, so in effect now what's happened in this country is we've lowered the betting age from 21 to 18. Okay, those are legal everywhere. Some states are starting to pull some lawsuits against them, since these companies are not regulated as gambling, but they are gambling. They're regulated as a financial market. Okay, that's why the age is lower. And especially for parents, they might not see that as gambling, right? If your kid's like, oh, I want to do, I'm going to do a prediction market, or I'm going to do day trading, and I want to learn about, quick stocks and all this other stuff, you might think that that sounds good. Okay, but anything where you're kind of starting to, it's frequently happening, it's speculative, it's kind of excitement driven, versus I'm going to put $200 this month into my IRA and then someday I'm going to get it back, right? Trading combines, kids buy into these where they get fake money to trade with to see if they're a good trader. Okay, but again, still gambling, even if it's not like they're not getting that money. And then crypto, meme coins, NFTs, all of these like new, which I don't even understand half of that, right? But all of that speculative financial risk is really problematic, right? So a couple years ago when this had first started with me, I remember I had two AP kids in my room and I heard them talking about the stock market. And then I was like, wait, again, right, excuse me, what? Tell me about that. Oh, we did this and we put this money in and then we lost everything. And like, well, that's stupid. So I'm not doing that anymore. It's like, okay, you're fine. Okay. But then sometimes you get no, I did this and I did this. And you see them watching the stocks, right? Like this is very dangerous. Okay. And it's something that might not feel like gambling, but absolutely has the same mechanics on the brain. Okay, so why is this so risky for young people? I mean, obviously, I think, right, we've already kind of talked about a lot of this. The brain is still developing into the mid-20s, right? So laying all of these gambling activities, whether they're technically gambling or not, are laying down these pathways in the brain that's really messing up the risk reward pathways that these kids have. Okay. And again, when it starts at age 5, 6, 7, 8 with loot boxes and whatever on video games, right, it might feel harmless, but it's laying those pathways down for later. Okay. We'll talk in a minute about risk factors, but early exposure is one of the highest indicators of a gambling addiction later. Okay. So just like with drugs and alcohol, like you're probably not going to give your 6-year-old a glass of wine, right? Probably not going to do that. When they're 16, might they have a glass of wine at a holiday dinner? Maybe. But again, that's your parenting choice to make. But if you're doing that, you're probably also having a discussion about it, right? So if you do a March Madness bracket with your kids, you have to have that discussion about it, right? Because you're laying those pathways. And just as a parent or an educator, if you're doing these kinds of activities in your class or your school, realize what you're doing, right? Realize that that's potentially risky to some kids. Okay, impulse control, obviously we work with teenagers, we know how that is. Just really the normalization of gambling in our entire society, and it's just constantly everywhere. I saw an article in the New York Times last week, someone sent around, that was people are putting in like bets, you can bet at someone's wedding, right? Like when is the groom gonna cry? How long will the first dance be? And then there's like a betting platform you can do, for that, right? Kalshi now is taking trades or bets on drug trials, whether or not this drug is actually going to, help people, which is like betting on people's lives, right? So not acceptable, okay? But that's where we're at. All of these gambling mechanics, right? Near misses is one. So this is an old slot machine trick, right? Is that, you spin the wheel 7, 7, and then, oh, you just missed the 7. And then you feel like you're closer. You're not closer, but you feel like you're closer, right? So that's a psychological effect. Also losses disguised as wins. I usually have good luck talking to kids about that because they get that, right? Like when you put in $1 and you won 35 cents and it rings and alarms, you lost 65 cents. You didn't win 35 cents, right? So all of these tactics that these companies use and these video games and gaming platforms use is really hijacking the psychological behaviors of the kids, right? Of course, to kids especially, in the way they make it, the rewards feel especially intense. Risks are definitely underestimated. Kids are not good at estimating the risk of what they're doing. They need some help with that. Habits can form early, absolutely. And then, like I said, early exposure is one of the biggest risk factors for having a gambling problem later. Okay, so now we've talked about what gambling is, so let's talk about what it looks like when it goes south, right? So ideally, we don't get to this point. We can put some protections into place to keep it from happening to this level, okay? But gambling disorder is actually a recognized behavioral addiction. It's in the DSM-5 manual, if you know what that is, where someone keeps gambling even when it causes problems with money, relationships, or health, and they struggle to stop even if they want to, okay? So this is now gone. This is not an issue of a kid or a person that's gambling too much and someone says, wow, you're really destroying your life. You probably should stop. And they're like, yeah, I probably should. Okay, but they can't, all right, because it's crossed into this, if you know anything about addiction, it's crossed into this addiction where the power to do it overcomes everything else, okay? And it's really hard for people to understand this because with a substance, you're injecting a chemical into your body. You kind of get that, right? But with gambling disorder, there's no chemical. Well, there is, it's already in your brain, okay? But it's not a moral failing. It's not that someone's stupid. It's not that someone needs to be more responsible, right? It's a brain disorder when it crosses to this level. Okay, so risk factors we kind of talked about. So you might, there's two kind of ways that people gamble, right? Some people gamble as we call them an escape gambler. Some people are an action gambler. Okay, so my son was an escape gambler. So he, for whatever reason, he had some other co-occurring mental health conditions, OCD, ADHD, super high risk for gambling disorder, as you can imagine. Some people either have low self-esteem, they're lonely, they're bored, they're using it as a stress relief, kind of a numbing out, like you would use a drug. Okay. And then the other side of it, which you might not expect, is like your super high achievers, your captain of the team, your AP star student, your really driven person. Especially athletes are very high risk because that athlete mentality of like keep it going, grit, do it. That's the gambling mentality. Okay, so you really want to watch kind of both sides of the spectrum because high achieving, very athletic kids, especially people also that think that they're smarter than the system, they're going to beat everybody out, they have kind of a little bit of an ego about it. That's another kind of big risk category. Okay, so I mean, sorry to say, we really have to watch for all the kids. Wish I had better news, but no. But we really need to watch for these things. Being male, definitely the boys are definitely being more pulled in, but there's been a big effort in the industry lately to really pull in the girls. Okay, so we need to watch for them as well. Thanks. Okay, so this is Kurt. This is my son. So this is he could, when he got to college, he got to the point where he couldn't do any basic tasks. Okay, he tells it later. We didn't know at the time that it was happening because he was out of state. He basically failed out. He had a 1.7 after previously being like a really good student. He went to a good Big Ten school. He couldn't sleep, eat, or shower if he still had money. Right. So as you can see, he kind of had this picture of his room, which was really just absolutely just filth, right? Just living in filth. He wasn't doing anything. He couldn't leave his computer. He was gambling. He said probably 15 hours a day, sitting at his computer. He brought a plastic tub into his dorm room so that he could pee in it because he couldn't leave his computer to walk down the hall to the community bathroom. Okay. So this is what we're talking about when it's crossed over to being an addiction. Obviously, a rational person isn't going to do that, right? But in the throes of that addiction, that drive to keep gambling is so strong. And he was like, I couldn't leave because what if the next hand was 21 or the next roulette ball hit or the next basket was the one that I needed? He couldn't leave and break out of that cycle. Okay. So this is where we're trying to keep it from getting to, because I will tell you, which in a minute I'll tell you, digging out of this part is incredibly difficult. Okay. So we really want to try to catch it sooner. But it's kind of insane what happens when they really go down this path. Okay, so as a teacher, I kind of put together a list of things that I've seen in the past with certain students or things I've heard about other people hearing about. So parents can look for these too, but I'm thinking, from the teacher lens right now. Subpar grades, right? We always know that when kids have bad grades, there's usually a reason. It's not just that they're a terrible bad student, right? There's usually some underlying reason that we're looking for. Absences is big. A lot of these kids, my son included, stay up all night, gambling and doing stuff, and then just can't go to class the next day. Falling asleep in class, right? Because they're tired because they've been up all night. Of course, distracted on electronics, definitely. Seeming anxious if away from electronics. So I've had kids that sometimes, you're trying to work with them on something, and even though they don't have the phone, they're constantly like touching for it, right? Like if they're anxious because like they don't have it, right? Like that's kind of could be a warning sign of gambling. An intense interest in sports, poker, finance, stock market, odds, or collectibles, right? So if you have a kid that's maybe constantly like looking online or reading a book about poker or constantly has cards or constantly talking about the odds, you can hear them talking about it. Stock market, they're looking at the stocks, right? That's things to just put on your radar. Okay. Lacking money they otherwise would have, right? So maybe a kid that, usually has money or has lunch or has whatever, all of a sudden doesn't have that, right? Like maybe money that they're supposed to be using to eat or to do whatever is going to gambling. And so they're not eating or they are missing money for some reason. Boasting around betting, if they're coming in class talking about their fantasy team and all this stuff, like that's something to watch out for. You may see or hear money or discussions changing hands, like if like there's a little bookie action going on. And then of course, anxious, depressed, isolated, defiant, things that you might look at a kid and be like, God, something's just not right. Like something's wrong. Like something's not right. You know, as a teacher, you get that feeling like there's something going on here. And it could be any plethora of things with a teenager, but please insert gambling as one of those things that you're going to ask about, because it could be that. And if that's not addressed, nothing else is going to get any better. Okay, so we kind of talked about most of these warning signs, you know, kind of the same thing: obsession, money problems, secretive behavior, right? Like if you kind of notice, like, you know, this is maybe be more happening at home, but a little secretive about what's happening. Mood changes, especially wild ones, right? Especially around, like if it's a bookie action, like every Monday, the kid is kind of a disaster, right? Because that's bookie payout day, right? Like you want to watch for these signs. Falling grades or loss of interest. Maybe they used to be on the football team and they quit, and they used to be in this and then they quit. They're kind of dropping out of life in a way. Or, you know, they're around a different crowd that maybe is a little riskier. And then, of course, trouble sleeping or focusing, right? If they can't focus in class because they're, you know, sleeping because they've been up all night gambling. Okay, next. Okay, so this was Kurt. I'll tell this story pretty quickly because it's not super relevant here, but where this goes when it's unaddressed, okay, or unknown or unaddressed, is usually once this kind of invisible line is crossed and a kid has a gambling addiction, just like with other addictions, same thing, it usually gets worse before it gets better. Okay, so this was one of my favorite quotes, and this is one for me. It's in some of the literature that we read at our meetings. Do not create a crisis, but if a crisis is in the natural course of events, do not stop it. So what it comes down to is the person that is suffering the addiction has to get to a pretty unmanageable place in their life before they're ready to do the hard work to change it. And I'm telling you, as a parent of that person, watching that happen to them, it's absolutely brutal is the only way I can explain it, right? So my son failed out of school twice, which wasn't even really a big deal in retrospect. He ended up in rehab once, didn't really came out, kind of started the same thing again. And then eventually, when we kind of stepped back and let him have consequences, he ended up getting arrested. And luckily that's now cleared up. He's done all his, you know, probation, and he's done everything. So now he's in the clear, but he, had some pretty severe consequences, from his gambling. And as the parent of that person, you have to let that happen. Okay. And I don't want anyone to ever have to suffer that because it's really awful. So this prevention piece is really, really important, that when we start to see these warning signs, we pull these kids off the path before they end up either, you know, arrested, you know, failed out of school, lost a job, tens or hundreds of thousands in debt, some kids. And I did want to mention suicide because gambling has the highest suicide risk of all addictions. It's about 1 in 5 attempt rate for kids or people that have a gambling problem. The attempt rate for suicide is about 20%. Okay, so sometimes, like, you might talk to a school counselor, I have in the past, like, well, they're just a kid, the gambling, like, it's not really going to get into much trouble. But no, the suicide risk is super high. Okay, so we really, really need to watch that because it's so hidden and nobody asks, and it just, you know, festers and festers. By the time it comes out, oftentimes people feel really super desperate. Okay, so we really want to watch that. It's incredibly dangerous. It's not like it's a fentanyl pill killing kids, but kids are dying. Okay, so we really want to watch that. Okay, next. Okay, so consequences if untreated. I kind of went through these with Kurt, but these are kind of the main ones. Of course, mental health problems either come before or after. Other substance abuse. So my son, for example, as he was starting to gamble and that was getting unmanageable, he turned to drugs to numb the gambling pain, which was numbing the regular pain, right? So that can happen. Of course, debt and financial problems is, you know, pretty nasty, especially if you get in with bookies and, you know, then those people are coming after the family. I could tell you a lot of stories, which I won't bore you with, but they're not pleasant. Ruined educational opportunities, right? So kids that may have scholarships and, you know, great educational paths kind of get stunted or lost completely. Loss of job or home if they're older. Of course, criminal and legal ramifications. Pretty much all people with a gambling addiction end up stealing at some point, either from their family or others, right? So that's big. Strained and damaged relationships, of course, and then we talked about suicide. So next. Okay, so protective measures. This is not really school, but kind of the same thing. So family expectations has shown to work with alcohol, right? The family being like, this is not acceptable in our family to do this, right? Kind of setting that standard, or you can set that for your school. Ask and listen, like just open your ears and hear what the kids are saying and ask them, say, hey, do you know anyone that's betting? Is anyone using Kalshi? What about the fantasy teams? Tell me about your fantasy league, right? Like ask them the questions because they'll tell you, like they'll tell you, they don't have any problems, right? We need to educate kids better, especially around influencers and advertising. They see all these people and they think it's a get rich quick. It's my side hustle is going to be gambling, which absolutely is not. They need to understand odds, right? You're meant to lose, you're going to lose. And on a sports book, if you're winning, they're going to limit you and they're not going to let you bet anymore. So you're not going to get ahead. They're going to make sure that you don't, right? School programs and policies I wanted to bring up, since this is for educators, is most schools do not have a gambling policy. So you want to think about if that's something that your school should have. And programming and care around club activities. I can't tell you how many schools are still having like casino games at the prom. They're doing poker clubs. They may have a new like investing club, which again could go either way, right? They're doing, bingo nights. They're doing, anything, prize wheels in class, any of this stuff, right? So just take a look around at your school activities and programs, and just with this new lens maybe of, is this gambling, right? And is this going to harm kids, right? So like, let's say casino night. Yeah, it's not real money, it's not whatever, but like you're also not serving non-alcoholic beer. Like, would that be okay? Like if I'm like, well, we're gonna have, it looks like a Corona, but it says non-alcoholic, and I have the lime in it, and the kids are at the prom with the Corona, you're probably like, oh my God, no, right? That's the same thing with the casino night, okay? So even though it's not real beer, it's not real gambling, but it's that same mentality, right? So just kind of think about that, okay? And then model good behavior yourself as the adults on campus or in your family as the parents. You have to have good betting behavior. You have to think about what activities you're participating in and how you are explaining those to the kids, or when you talk about the kids with it, right? So fantasy football at my school is really big, but there's, I always have a discussion around that, right? Because they're going to do it. Like, they're not going to not do it, but have the discussion, okay? And then, of course, monitor online activity, block when possible, of course, at school, obviously, and at home. Okay, so we're almost at the end. So if you suspect a problem, right, this is a little more parent-focused, right? But stay connected. And encourage non-gambling activities, right? So especially at school, let's try to get some of this gambling stuff out of there. Installing blockers and limits, like we're talking about with True's family, like getting it so it's not even an option for them during the school day. And then if there's a kid that's suffering gambling harm, or any reason that a kid is suffering, right, just try to really always remember, like, there's a kid in there, and their behavior and their defiance and their bad grades and their lack of doing their homework and their bad attitude, right? Like, there's a reason that those things are happening, okay? And that reason might be that they're a gambling addict, or it could be any number of other things, but just remember that there's a kid in there. And we really need to train our counselors to ask about gambling. So when a kid shows up and they're depressed and they're failing out and they're having problems at home and they're fighting with their parents, all this stuff, gambling could be the reason that that's happening. So we need to start asking what their gambling and betting behavior is to see if that's contributing, okay? What not to do, of course, interrogate, argue, and accuse. This is never good. Not to provide bailouts and smooth consequences for kids, especially for parents. If your kid is absent all the time because they're up all night gambling and you're continually giving them an excuse for school, like, this is not helping, okay? Or if like the kid is constantly late and we're letting that slide, that's not helping the kid. Or they get a bad grade and that's not helping them, okay? So they need to have consequences of those actions to hopefully so that they don't, again, get arrested or have a suicide attempt later. We'd rather they have the consequence now, okay? And then don't ignore it. If you see it happening, don't ignore it, okay? And isolate yourself. So what we really want to do is we need parents and schools to receive gambling education, peer support, and we need to know what to do if you find a problem, okay? And so our organization at Parents Standing Together, we can help you do that, okay? So it would be more for the parent, but if you're an educator and you're like, I feel like there's the problem with this kid, reach out to us because we know where to go with that, okay? You can call your state gambling council, you can call 1-800-GAMBLER or 1-800-MY-RESET and get help. Anyone can call those numbers to get help. And then each state has their own kind of support systems, right? So we can help you navigate that. Okay, and then Kurt, this is just Kurt real quick in recovery. This was us. We just went to Nashville to the National Problem Gambling Conference last month, which was super fun. He went with me also. That was on his 1 year. We went to Disney World for his 1 year sobriety date. And he says, I asked him what's his one quote, and he said, giving up one thing allowed me to experience everything. So definitely it's hard if you're into that cycle, but life on the other side is much better for him and for me and for all of us, because it's a really hard thing to deal with. Okay, next. Okay, yeah, vision, right? We envision a future where young people grow up free from gambling-related harm, supported by informed communities and systems. So I thank you for watching this to become part of that informed community and that system that's really helping the kids to stay safe. Okay, how you can help, refer parents to us, right? If you want a presentation like this for your school, I'm happy to speak to anybody that wants to hear about gambling addiction, and really examine your school policies. Like, look around and see how much gambling is at your school. And just see, I'm not saying you have to change it. You can if you want or not, but just be aware and see what you have going on. Okay. And if anybody, has any other ideas, wants to fund us, donate, partner with us, please contact me, which is on the next page. So that's our email, hello@parentsstandingtogether.org, and our website. We have a lot of information on there, and you can reach out anytime. We have a lot of people that are willing and ready to help. So.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Kim. I appreciate that. I learned so much from you today. Realized that I have gambled more than I thought I had.
Right.
I wanted to ask you one question is I guess we kind of talked about this, but what, I guess teachers and educators should care about this for a lot of different reasons, but there are like short, medium, long-term outcomes of prevention. What are some of those things that maybe students will get to experience if we prevent gambling addictions or gambling problems from happening from the beginning?
Yeah. Well, we definitely like I was saying, once they kind of cross over into gambling in a really harmful and problematic way, right? It's just a really, really nasty path to be on. Right. And I mean, I know we love our kids. Like, I love my students, I call them my kids, my students. And, they're going off, especially my seniors, and they're going off to college. And I just want them to, or to life, whatever they're doing. And I just want them to be happy and successful. So I talk to them a lot and warn them a lot about, here are some potential downfalls that's really going to, like mar your experience, right? We want you to go through and have a happy and healthy life and reach your full potential and be an amazing person. And when you're dragged down by a gambling addiction, like, that's just not going to happen.
Yeah, so I imagine things like connecting with their peers, like being able to meet their full potential, having great post-secondary opportunities, like those are all things that can be taken away if a student does end up having a gambling addiction or a
And
gambling
being
problem.
connected and being connected, because gambling addiction is very isolating. So what happens to people is they really pull out of life and they stop interacting and having these social experiences. And humans are very social people, which is why this whole phone thing is such an issue, right? Because everyone's in their own phone now instead of interacting with each other. And
Yeah.
gambling really pulls people into isolation, right? So they really need that connection with
Yeah.
other people.
That's great, thank you. I do see one question in the chat. So regarding other activities, non-gambling related, which non-gambling activities did you try to point your son towards, and how did that part of the process go? And if you can kind of tailor that for a student experience too, that would be great.
Yeah, I think that, with students in high school especially, we really are trying to get kids involved with activities. This is connection piece still, right? And so Kurt did have some, he was running track and he was still doing some things. And his track coach was amazing, by the way. When they were at track practices or meets, absolutely no phones at all, right? Which was great. And that was the best time. And he looks back at that and he's like, that's like the only time that I could like relax, right? So
Interesting.
when we're taking the phones from the kids and we're not allowing them that, and they think they're angry about it, secretly they're kind of relieved that they have that off their plate, right?
Yeah.
So I think any kinds of activities that kids can do that are off an online platform and engaging with others, right? So yeah, any kind, like, cooking club or sports, especially anything we can try to direct kids towards that make connections with other people, I think is super important. Now, can they still be gambling and doing that? Of course, right?
Right.
But we want as much of that as possible, because gambling can suck up the whole life. We want them to have a full life with lots of activities and lots of choices.
Awesome. Thank you, Kim. We interviewed several students at Truce Family to hear their thoughts on restrictive phone policies. I will send that to everyone who has been here today because I think that has some really good insights into how students at first really don't like having their phones limited, but then eventually they're actually really relieved. So I'm glad to hear that your son felt that way too.
Yep, exactly.
Kim, I'll ask you one more. Sounds obvious, but why should educators care about preventing child gambling?
I think really that, I mean, I know anyone that's a teacher, you really get close relationship with your kids, right? And you really love your kids, and you're really, working I mean, I'm a teacher, I get it, working your tail off for them, right? And it's not just that we want them to be successful in school, right? We want them to be successful in life, right? So anything that an educator can do that can enhance the general well-being of their students, right? We don't just want them to have good grades and learn physics. We want them to learn how to be good friends and to be good partners and to work with a team and to just be generally happy with life, right? So preventing gambling harm is along with all the other things that we don't want them doing, because we know that that's going to suck their quality of life. So we want them not to participate in gambling, right? So that they don't have harm from it, just like we're talking about drugs, alcohol, other things that might sort of suck out their joy and not allow them to become, the full person that they're meant to be.
Exactly. Yeah, we just want our students to live their best life, and unfortunately, our cell phones have become a way for us to not live our best life, and that's Kim, what we're here for you on the child gambling side, for us on Truce Family. It can be all kinds of things, but we just want kids and students to live their best life and not be sucked up in a phone, which provides some connection, but there is a real world out there. There is a way to use a cell phone as a positive, productive tool. So Kim, thank you so much. Thank you everyone for being here with us today. Kim, I learned so much from you. Thank you for taking the time to presenting with us. I think educators are really going to learn a lot from you and see how having a phone policy in schools can really help our students live their best life and prevent some really big issues that kids are at risk of experiencing, like child gambling. Everyone, again, Alejandra Acosta, Director of Community Engagement with Truce Family, Kim Freudenberg, President of Parents Standing Together. Thank you so much for being here with us today. We appreciate you being here, and please stay in touch. Thank you.